All righty. First of all, I want to thank Brenda for all the work she does. I remember that first BrainSTEPS meeting that I was invited to attend with the Aaron Intermediate Unit in Indiana County. And I'm going to tell you honestly, it changed my life. Not just about students with concussions, but about students in general. Are we paying attention to their needs on an individual basis, on a daily basis? This information that you're getting here today can be expanded to so many areas of student need. So you may be asking yourself the question, who is this guy? And why is he standing in front of us talking to us? That's a fair question, and you deserve a fair answer. Before I give you that answer, I think we need to understand some common ground. Basically, what is a career and technical education? So I've come up with a statement. It's not a definitive statement. It's not a statement that's being used nationally. It's my statement, but I think it's going to help us focus what I'm going to talk about. A career and technical education is an academically and technically rigorous training program to prepare a student to transition successfully into a post-secondary career or into post-secondary education. An academically and technically rigorous training program to prepare a student to successfully transition into a post-secondary career or a post-secondary training program. Now, if there's any words in that statement that confuse people, it's the words academically rigorous. And not those words independently, but those words put together when talking about a career and technical program. Because 15, 20 years ago, there was some reason not to put those words together with a career and technical program, but not today. Somewhere, someplace, sometime, someone sat down and figured out that it costs just as much to warehouse a student in career and technical education as it does to educate a student at a career and technical center. The difference is the students that's educated at the career and technical center, there's a much bigger return for your financial investment. If that student completes successfully a career and technical program, they're going to go out and get a job at a living wage. And they're going to invest that money back into their community. The return is much higher for a student who receives an adequate education at a career and technical center. So the state went to industry and they said to industry, will you help us develop skill sets that we can take back to our career and technical centers to serve as a guideline for what we need these students to do so they're prepared to make that transition into a career or into post-secondary education. And industry said, sure. So they developed skill sets. There's skill sets for HVAC. There's skill sets for culinary arts. There's skill sets for collision repair technology. There are skill sets for every program that we teach at a CTC that is approved by the state. They call those skill sets programs of study. And therein is the problem. Every program of study is different, is unique. They are tailored to meet the demands of a profession. So that's why I'm here, one of the reasons, to tell you that. Programs of study are unique environments, tailored to meet the demands of that profession. Let's consider students. And I'm going to expand it just for a minute outside of what you're here for. I'm going to talk about students who have a traumatic injury or illness, which could include things like seizure disorder, diabetes, an accident that requires major surgery on a limb, and TBI. When that student transitions back to the Career and Technical Center, we need to have a plan that's going to meet those students' needs. We need to consider how is that injury or illness going to impact their ability to interact with the program of study environment. So let's narrow it back down to the concussion student. We all know the symptoms of concussions. We all know all the possible symptoms of concussions. Let's take a look at dizziness and a loss of balance. And we have two students. One is going into collision repair, or one is going into carpentry, and one is going into digital media technology. And they both have these symptoms of dizziness and loss of balance. Well, obviously, the student that's going into carpentry, dizziness and loss of balance is a much bigger risk for that student. It's going to have a great impact on their ability to interact in a carpentry environment with all the climbing and the using of power equipment. The student with the same symptoms going into digital media technology might be able to sit at that chair, edit a video, create a website. If you take another symptom, the onset of headaches by exposure to a computer monitor, clearly the student in DMT is at a disadvantage. And how their accommodations are developed is going to look differently than the student who's going to carpentry, who might be able to function very well there, never having to look at a computer monitor. We'll just exempt them from that small part of that program and maybe put dark glasses on that student. So when we look at students coming into our environment, we have to think about them in terms of the unique environment they're walking into. I'm not sure which button to push, so I'll just push one and see what happens. There it is. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Return to recommendations need to include specific guidelines tailored to meet the environmental and academic challenges of a program of study. But how are you supposed to know that? How are you supposed to know what those challenges are in that program of study? We have 14 programs of study at our school. Well, there's a couple of things you can do to get that information into a meeting that's discussing how to bring the student back into the school setting. You can invite a representative from the Career and Technology Center to that meeting. That's the simplest way, that's the quickest way, that's the easiest thing to do. Bring in an outside expert to sit in on the meeting, to hear what the symptoms are, to evaluate them against the environment that the student is going into, and make some recommendations. Maybe we need to sit this kid out of this part of the lab. Maybe we need to cut back on the 45-minute lecture that they have to sit through in health occupations until the symptoms lessen. Because we're looking at a two-prong approach here. We're looking at reducing the onset of symptoms, as we've talked about, but we're also looking at a physical safety component. Do I want that dizzy carpentry student on the roof putting on shingles? Probably not. So that's one approach. Bring the CTC representative to the meetings. The other approach is to have a resource. On the cover of your folder, right up here, there's a little link to what we call the Safe Return to the Career and Technical Center. If you go there, you will find a bunch of surveys that we have made that look like this. I'm not going to belabor it and go through every single page of the survey.
You want to pull it up online?
No, they're here. And they all look very similar to this, but as you can expect, every one is going to be a little different than every other one. I pulled up two for an example that are extreme examples of programs that are very, very separated in what is expected of the student in that program. But as you go down through the different domains, we have the physical work and requirements, the exposure to chemicals, the lab environment, safety equipment worn. The other side, we have visual stimulation, all the different areas in a program of study. And those little bars on there tell you how often during a week a student is engaged in that particular subcategory. So in digital media technology, the amount of time spent on the computer is going to be almost 100%. High 80s, 90s, close to 100%. In carpentry, the time spent on the computer might be down to 10%. So you as a caregiver, you as a person helping to make decisions about returning the student to the Career and Technical Center can make intelligent recommendations because you know what that student's day is going to look like for that half that they spend with us. Okay? And we also developed from that a little page that takes all of those things and puts them on a chart. And some people think this chart is overkill. That's an awful lot of information we have to go through. And it probably is, but that's who I am. I'm an overkill person. If a little bit of information is good, a lot of information is better. And you can go down this list and determine what the student should avoid, what the student get involved in a little bit, how that part of the day, that 2.5 hours they spend with us should look. Again, for the two reasons. One, to protect them physically from injury, but also to help those symptoms, that recovery, so they can come around quicker instead of the 100 days, it might be the 50. You miss 100 days of theory class at the Technology Center. Think about it. That's 3 days every day that you're actually missing because we're there for 2.5 to 3 hours. That's 3 biology classes the kid is missing every day. If I said this student's missing 3 biology classes every day, you'd all be up in arms going, how can we do that? The student will never catch up. Well, think about sending them to the Career and Technology Center and having them sit out every day for 100 days because their symptoms won't go away. We only have 3 years to teach them this stuff. That seems like a lot, but it isn't. It goes very, very quickly. They get 100 days behind, we're talking about an extra school year, which can be done and should be done if it's necessary, but it shouldn't be done if it's not, just by being smart up front and taking care of the student's needs. So that's point number 1. We already did that one. There it is. The Career and Technical Center needs to be a part of the information chain from day one. When I wrote this 2.5 years ago, we weren't getting invited to meetings. We weren't getting even told the student had a concussion. Many times, we heard about the concussion because the student was telling another student in the class and the teacher overheard it. And they would get on the phone and call me because I'm the special education teacher, so obviously I know everything about concussions and nonconforming gender and suicide prevention. Those are all because I'm the special education facilitator. And they would call me and say, this kid had a concussion Friday, and this is Monday. He was hitting the football game. Well, what did the home school say? Well, they don't know. And so I would call the home school and say, did you know the student had a concussion? So when I wrote this, I felt this was much more critical. But now the point I want to make is as you train these CMT teams, let them know. Call the tech center and say, Johnny had a concussion on Friday night at the football game. Joey tripped in the woods and hit his head on a log. Here's the symptoms we're seeing. We're going to have a meeting. We want you to come to it. Or we want to use the documents that you created, the Safe Return to Career and Technical Center. We want to do something to let you know so that you can plan for Johnny when he comes to your school. We're not saying don't send Johnny. What we're saying is don't send Johnny if he's dizzy and I don't know it. and he's working a welder. Because we don't unilaterally want the responsibility of Johnny blowing up the school. You know, and we think, oh, but it's true. I had a student who later in the day, the teacher heard him tell another student that he went blind at the water fountain for 30 seconds after a concussion. Went blind at the water fountain for 30 seconds. Everything fuzzed back into shape. He went down to class and welded for the rest of the afternoon. Called the home school. Oh yeah, he had a concussion. We didn't know. So you have to let us know that stuff so that we can be part of the process. Since last night, I've backed off this slide. As I went over this, that was a response to 2.5 years ago. We just weren't being called. And now we're getting called about half of them. Depends on the school district, what's going on, whether they want to let us know or not. I'm not sure what the politics are behind all this. Maybe it's because I tend to be a little aggressive and abrasive. I don't know. I don't know. But it doesn't have to be me or somebody like me. It can be the safe return to Career and Technical Center. You could have the CMT team, all of them, actually go to the Career and Technical Center and tour for a day and take notes and develop their own document. Or one or two of your team go and so just as long as the Career and Technical Center is represented at the meeting. That's all you need to do. So that information is there. Because I'm going to tell you, when I see a student come into the building, and if I do know they have a concussion, and they give me a piece of paper and it says 50% workload and 50% homework, I sit them out. I go down to the teacher, and some of them are really far away from my office, but I make that sacrifice, and I walk down that hall and I say, sit this kid out today until I get documentation from a parent, a medical professional, or a CMT team telling me it's safe to have that student in your lab. Because 50% homework, rest when they request it, are all nice academic accommodations. And yes, a good chunk of our day is academic, but a good chunk of our day isn't. And how much of it is and isn't, again, comes back to those environmental surveys. What's going on in that program area? We need better information, and so that student can maximize their healing time and also prevent physical injury. We sit them out of the program till we hear better. And if mom calls and says, I want him in that lab, I want him doing his work, we give the warnings, we document, and then if we see him weaving at the welding table, we'll take him down, let him rest. But we want some sort of documentation. There was one more. It's on your paper. You can find them on here. This is the old-fashioned PowerPoint. For you younger kids, we call this paper. I don't know if anybody in here is as old as I am. Maybe not. But are you? Do you remember mimeograph machines? Huh? How far we've come that we actually just like print it out and like it's in my hand, okay? For some students, on the last page, the 5th slide, for some students, return to school and return to tech are separate issues because of the separate environments. And how that plays out, I can't tell you how to write that, how to decide how you balance that, because I don't know the student that you're dealing with. You have to look at the student's symptoms and find out where do we make the accommodations, how big do the accommodations have to be? Do we have to go to a half day? Is that half day at the tech? Is it at the home school? Do they go 2 days to tech and 3 days to the home school? The whole emotional piece is very important, especially the more severe the concussion is. Maybe they need to come to tech even just an hour a week so they can spend time with their friends. I'm talking about the more severe concussions, and we've had some very severe concussions in our building. And I'll tell you about that in just a second. But how that looks depends on the student's needs, but it needs to be considered. So I will close by showing you this little green tag down here. A couple of years ago, we got a Highmark grant to do some videos about concussions that were taking place in our building. The concussion that brought me to BrainSTEPS was a young lady who was in 2 car accidents, almost a year apart. They were very severe car accidents. The brain trauma was severe because the car rolled in both cases. So damage wasn't just located in any one single part of her brain. She had every part of her brain affected with symptoms from a concussion. Everything from the food that she ate tasted differently, to her vision, to her ability to stand, her ability to concentrate, her social interactions changed. And we had 2 other students in our building, both of whom, all 3 of them were car accidents, just coincidentally. All of them fairly severe. All of them had to put off post-secondary plans because these concussions happened right before their senior year. So we videotaped these students, and they give some very candid presentations. I have a difficult time watching it, and I was there when we recorded it. It chokes me up to think about it now. I encourage you to go there. They're on YouTube. Hopefully this link, I worked with our tech guy at school for about an hour trying to figure out how to get a link that worked. I think this will take you there. And there's a version for 9 to 12 graders. There is a version a little bit younger where we take out some of the graphic descriptions for younger students. There is another totally separate video for elementary age students about concussions. And then there's one where what's her first name? Vanessa Fazio from UPMC talks about the symptoms of concussions at the various levels, age groups, okay? So that's there. So let me leave you with one story, because I'm pushing my timeline here. My main job is special education facilitator at our school. So I go to all of the IEPs across the county that our students have, about 149 of them a year. And we had one student who was struggling academically, both at the tech center and at home school, primarily in math. And he happened to be in a program, if you went down the profile, the environmental profile, that was very hard in math. It had some very high goals in math, and he wasn't achieving them. So we thought, we'll go to the IEP, and I will present to them what our concerns are, and maybe we can do a partnership here. Maybe they can modify what they're doing with him there, so that his math there reflects what we're trying to do with him at the tech center. He just wasn't getting enough time, enough exposure, didn't have the basic fundamental skills. So we thought we'll address this at the IEP, because that's what an IEP is for. So we went to the meeting, and we presented our side of the case, very proud of ourselves. And the math teacher was there, and she looked at me, and she said something similar to this. I don't think I can help you. I don't have any idea what you do up there. I found that answer very disturbing. Unfortunately, it's not the first time I've heard that answer, and we sort of have a plan when that comes up. We go back and figure it out. But then I got to thinking about this meeting today, and about BrainSTEPS, and about concussion management teams, and I got to thinking, I don't think you have the luxury of not knowing what goes on up there, because you're working with student lives. Again, the 2 prongs, you're working on their health and their recovery, but you're also working on their safety. I don't think you can wash your hands of the responsibility of knowing what's happened in your career and technical center. So when these concussion management teams get together, it's mandatory that there is somebody there who knows what we do. Either have somebody from the tech center there, use the safe return to career and technical center, Send your team up and develop a document and a checklist of your own, something, so that when you address their return to the Career and Technical Center, it's not just this generic prescription that means nothing to us when I put him under a hydraulic lift underneath a 2,000-pound car. 50% steady time is not going to save his life. So that's my second reason for being here today, and I appreciate Brenda inviting me, is to plead with you, please take our half of the day seriously. We're not a warehouse. We're not a babysitter. We are academically and technically rigorous. We challenge them physically. We challenge them mentally. We fatigue them. The best of students sometimes come out of there fatigued. They're going in there with a concussion. We have to protect them, and we have to care for them. So thank you for your time.